Florida. Many things come to mind when you think of this place. Some thoughts might be vacations where you run your hands through the sand, listening to the crashing waves as the sun sets. Others might include its rich history and humanity's greatest achievements in exploring the seas as well as the stars. But one of the greatest things it has to offer are the marvelous organisms that call it home. Whether they are a crocodile lurking in the marshes, frogs populating the trees, deer grazing in the forests, or aquatic predators looking for their next meal, these organisms all serve a special role in the complex ecosystems that make up Florida and its keys. During our excursion, we aim to get a greater understanding of this intricate web. So come and join us as we explore the homes of these creatures and discover the marvels of the Florida Keys. Our journey begins at 4 a.m. in Cincinnati's airport. As much as I hate getting up that early, I honestly just felt excited to be going on this trip. Hours later, I landed in Miami, and once the group was all there, we headed for the Keys. On the way, we stopped by a fruit shop called Robert Is Here. The smoothies were great to say the least, and there were a lot of animals they kept around, so you had something you could look at while you enjoy your treat. Soon enough, we were finally back on the road and arrived at Sea Camp at around 5 o'clock. Only 13 hours after I left home. We were able to catch a spectacular sunset and say hello to some of the friendly cats roaming around the area. Our first encounter with the actual wildlife of Florida would come later with a small herd of key deer roaming through the area. These little guys are a genetically distinct subspecies of white-tailed deer that only get to be about 2 feet tall at the shoulder. Since people tend to feed them, they are also super friendly. Although, since they are an endangered species, it was sadly illegal to interact with them. Monday morning, a few of us decided to get up early and watch the sunrise. Sunrises are always stunning, but this was the first time we had really seen what the area around Sea Camp looks like. This really had an effect to make it all the more beautiful. We got to start out the day in one of the best ways possible, walking around looking at the mangroves, some of the largest hermit crabs I have ever seen, and upside-down jellyfish. After breakfast, the staff gave us a tour around the campus and assigned us our snorkel gear. Then, they took us to the swim canal to do a swim test. After everyone passed, we did a snorkel workshop as well, where we familiarized ourselves with the correct ways to clear our masks and snorkels, how to dive, and how to swim in ways that stirs up less sediment. However, this time wasn't just spent practicing the waters that we had stirred up and gotten very murky, but we also got to explore the canal a little. Here we found some fire sponge, which has fibers that get into your skin and cause irritation, hence the name. And there were also these little neat minnows and some shaving brush algae. As this ominous photo shows, there is also a large barracuda living under the docks. When you look at this fish, it definitely feels like you're looking at a predator. It's a very interesting experience. Originally, we had planned to go to the offshore reef. However, the winds had a different idea. Because of these conditions, we instead headed for the coral heads. This is a type of reef that exists closer to the shore and is made up of mostly boulder corals. And we definitely found a lot of them. Most were fairly small, like this grooved brain coral. But there was one that was absolutely massive. It was so big, in fact, that it was difficult to get the entire thing in frame. When it comes to fish, this area has the essential role as the midway house for subadult fish to live before they go offshore, but after they are too big to find shelter in the shallows. In my opinion, the best thing that we were able to see were the schools of spotlight parrotfish. These guys are famous for many things, like their amazing coloration or the ability of their females to change their sex if the male parrotfish dies. The fish were numerous, and this goes to show how just a little bit of shelter provided by these corals goes a long way to helping these fish thrive in their ecosystems. Before going back, we also visited a nearby sponge flats. This area is important for reducing the turbidity of the water around them. Not only are there large algae competing with the plankton for nutrients, but there are also other organisms like vase sponges which filter through the water, picking out plankton with great efficiency, and moon jellies which pick up whatever creatures run into them as they aimlessly float around. And let us not forget the large soft corals picking up plankton as they effortlessly wave back and forth in the water. We also found a horse conch puttering around on the sea floor. This is an absolutely massive gastropod, and I really liked its brilliant orange coloration. Thankfully, on Tuesday the winds died down, and after waiting for some manatees to leave the dock area, we were able to go to the offshore reef. Apparently the conditions were just under the limit where they wouldn't let us go out, and you could tell because the seas were very choppy. At one point our anchor fell into the water and the bow of our little pontoon boat began to be pulled under. The crew were easily able to fix this, but in the moment I legitimately thought we were sinking. Offshore reefs provide many things for the environment. They can have large-scale effects which impact the entire globe, like their ability to sequester CO2 as calcium carbonate in the coral skeletons. In other cases, the reef has more local effects, like providing an abundance of shelter and nutrients, which allow all sorts of fish populations from small minnows to sharks to thrive. This effect becomes obvious when you get in the water and see the hundreds of organisms swimming around you. At times you would chase one fish only to be surprised by another amazing one like this French angelfish. Other times it would be something like this four-eyed butterfly fish, which uses its eye spots at the end to fool predators to strike behind them, making it easier for them to get away. There were so many different types of fish in such high numbers that you could just pick any direction in the reef and still be amazed. The diversity out here is just astounding. And of course, I cannot talk about the offshore reef without also mentioning my favorite marine organisms, Christmas tree worms. These creatures have two mesmerizing antennae with small, brightly colored spiraling tentacles that kind of look like Christmas trees. The most interesting part to me about them is the fact that they have photosensitive cells in these antennae. This gives them simple light and dark vision that they use to sense if a predator is looming above them. Naturally, for my research project, I chose to study these fascinating worms on the trip. And although they didn't cooperate with what I was trying to do, I still can't complain about having another chance to observe them. When it comes to the corals, we found many encrusting as well as soft corals like these sea fans and sea pipes. However, there used to be a lot more branching corals covering every spur on the reef. Some still existed in certain areas, like the section that this trumpet fish was hiding around in, but the vast majority of these corals were killed off by a mysterious disease. In fact, we later learned that since the 90s, coral cover in the reefs of the lower Keys have gone down from 60% to only 2%. This is tragic not only because the beautiful corals are being replaced by bare rock, but we have also lost an organism that provided essential oxygen for us and a lot of shelter necessary for the reef fish to truly thrive. Efforts are being made to regrow the reef, but part of me really is disappointed that I didn't get to see how magnificent it was before this plague. So after we got back from the reef and got some lunch, we got out the kayaks and decided to explore Coupon Bight. This consisted mostly of shallow seagrass beds, and paddling along in our kayaks we saw several nurse sharks and one lemon shark that we tried to get on video. Unfortunately, that didn't work out as we planned, but we did get a good video of some minnows, which, is better than nothing. We also found small boulder corals called golf ball coral and an interesting upside-down jellyfish with blue-green ribbon-like tentacles. There were also these algae that looked like little stemmed plants. However, these are actually large single-celled organisms that have evolved to extend part of their cell upwards to act as a solar panel. Between the mangroves and the seagrass beds, this area was really beautiful, and honestly, we just had a lot of fun on the kayaks. After dinner, our evening started out with looking for sand crabs and saying hi to an octopus. After messing around a little bit longer and finding more sand crabs, we headed to the mess hall to start Algae Lab. We weren't really sure what to expect, but Doc had us think about the invertebrates found in the ocean, and we were instructed to pick through 2 samples of algae and sort through the animals that we found. The first was the oatmeal algae. I didn't really expect to find anything because it just kind of looked like a bunch of muck. I was surprised though because it was actually full of animal life. There were a few arthropods like the stone crab another group found, as well as our pistol shrimp. However, for the most part, our sample was dominated by worms, most of them being annelids that can more easily burrow through the thick algae. There was also a large majority of green siliceous sponges and a few feather dusters here and there. The second sample was the calcareous algae that built itself a skeleton a lot like a coral. I didn't know that these types of algae existed, so that alone was interesting. Denser black sponges also accompanied these algae, as well as many mantis shrimp. These shrimp expressed a wild variety of color and would hit our tweezers hard enough to actually make them ring. The other major inhabitants of this algae were the brittle stars, which are not only some of the most beautiful echinoderms, but also possessed camouflage like these stripes, which made them really hard to find. What Algae Lab taught us is just how populous even the meekest of environments can be in the ocean. In many of the places you look, So long as it has the necessary nutrients needed to support life, you will find a creature that has perfectly adapted to live in that area. The first place we went to on Wednesday was Johnson's Hammock, where we snorkeled around the roots of the red mangroves and then moved further out towards the sponge flats. Because the water was only a few feet deep, it was actually very challenging to swim in a way that would not just kick up all the sediment and obscure our view. We did a fairly good job at keeping the water clean, and we were able to see sights that I'm only used to seeing in professional aquariums. A major role this environment plays in the marine ecosystem is that it provides shelter for many juvenile fish, as well as their predators like these mangrove snappers. While there were a lot of fish, the creatures that stood out the most were all the sessile organisms. Out of all of these, my favorites were definitely the tunicates, which start out as a larva with a head and a dorsal nerve core, and then after swimming around for a while, they find a good place to settle and actually transform into something that looks more like a sponge, and they live the rest of their lives as a filter feeder. As you start to move away from the mangrove roots, you find a lot of seagrasses and algae, like this Valonia here, which is one of the largest single-celled organisms. Here and there you may find a couple sponges and even a baby barracuda. As you move out into the sponge flats, you'll find a lot more sponges, and maybe even a stingray or a golf ball coral here or there. What you'll notice the most is that none of these environments had a well-defined border. Instead, they all slowly faded into each other, and in many cases, they sort of existed within each other. I really enjoyed this area, and I definitely could have stayed a lot longer. But after a while, it was time to go to lunch, so we took a look at some lobsters and then went on our way. Out of all the environments we visited, the coastal intertidal was one of my favorites. From a distance, it didn't look like much. However, it's actually incredibly interesting once you take a closer look. Not only was it a great spot for a group photo, but the hardscape was literally made out of old coral skeletons, like this branched one, or this boulder, or even interesting pieces like these snail shells embedded in rock. It was also fascinating how variable this environment was. During low tide, the areas closer to shore received much less water from the ocean, and the sun has an easier time warming it up. This also comes with other issues like less oxygenation and higher salinity. When you step into the water here, you can physically feel how warm it is and see how only the most resilient organisms like this hair algae are able to live here. A little further out, where the rocks are only submerged during high tide, there were thousands of snails that resisted this desiccation by holding their operculum shut and just waiting until the tide came back. Then you get even further out, where the ocean is able to replenish the tide pools with water, and you get organisms like limpets, nerite snails, crabs, and other large organisms. Overall, this area was a testament to how sometimes life needs to be adaptable, and one species or another always finds a niche in these extreme environments. This lake was dug out during the construction of Route 1 on Big Pine Key. It is surrounded by a pinewood forest with lots of buttonwood, which get its name from their large button-like seeds, some scattered Florida slash pines, and a tree called poisonwood. Despite its pretty puffball flowers, it actually contains an oil in its leaves that give you a rash that is much worse than poison ivy. It is definitely a plant that you admire from a distance. The lake also provides the most consistent source of fresh water on the Key, and therefore it has become a home to species like these alligators, which cannot handle salt water for long periods of time. Before this, I had never seen an alligator in the wild, and it was cool to see them interact. Judging by the grace that these large predators exhibit as they swim, they are certainly animals that are well adapted to life in the water. We tried to do shark fishing on Tuesday, but we just didn't have any luck doing that. The sharks were taking the bait, but they just weren't getting hooked. So, what we decided to do on Wednesday is try again, bait our lines, cast them out, and just wait a little bit longer. After some time, we checked the lines, and the same situation as Tuesday happened again. Sharks were taking the bait, but they weren't getting hooked. So we rebaited them and waited a little bit longer. Right as the sun was dipping below the clouds, we checked the lines one last time. And believe it or not, on my line, I actually managed to catch a shark. And for some reason, I was super proud of this. I kept saying, "Oh yeah, that is my shark," as we were walking back.
Alright, so this is a bonnethead shark, Sphyrina tiburon. It's a female, no claspers back here. It also was almost a meal for something else. So something else went after it, a little bit larger.
So these guys didn't get stressed out really easily. So between being hooked and almost being eaten, we couldn't keep her out of the water for very long. Luckily, we were able to catch another one on Max's line and spend a little bit more time with these guys.
Okay, so this is apparently the boyfriend of that girl. Excuse me, sir. Well, you can tell it's a mature male. The claspers are almost the same length as those pelvic fins. And this guy's in a little bit better frisky shape than the girl was. He's definitely not happy that I have him. Put him upside a little bit. Nice little bit of tonic and mobility. So this is a way to relax him. These guys are, again, really super shocky. This guy hasn't been on the hook very long at all. You can see the beautiful, beautiful color that these guys have. Good counter shading. White belly, gray top, mixes in really well with this kind of murky water. And cephalofoil's reduced, does a great job of helping him excavate. He's got crushing jaws. Show your jaws, big boy. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
After releasing this guy, we got dinner, had a short reflection, and celebrated the week by having a bonfire and some s'mores. We were done checking out all the ecosystems of the Florida Keys, but you can't look at a region without also exploring its human settlements. Which brings us to Thursday. The first place we visited was the Mote Laboratory, where they researched the effects of the ocean's chemistry on corals and grow new corals to be placed in the ocean. A lot of work actually goes into this process because you cannot just simply dump a bunch of coral in the ocean and expect good results. Instead, they have to grow little coins of the same coral individual and insert them into a boulder. Since corals only reproduce once they reach a certain size, the aim here is to make the corals grow to sexual maturity as quickly as possible by starting that growth in different spots that will eventually fuse together into one bigger organism. Since they also want to maintain genetic diversity, they breed the larger specimens. Normally, corals only breed once a year during night. The researchers want the corals not only to breed more often, but also to do their business during the daytime. To do this, they grow these specimens in special tanks that reverses the day-night cycle. Additionally, the laboratory also does important work in trying to identify the pathogens that have been killing off the branch corals as well as the new ones killing the boulder corals. With the end of our tour here, it was now time to visit Key West. We first stopped at a place called Baby's Coffee and then got some lunch at the Hogfish Grill. After this, we drove into the city and made our way around town. They had many nice looking houses as well as large concrete buildings that seemed to be built to withstand a hurricane. We also got a good look at the residents' gardens with beautiful plants like this hibiscus, this red thorn-bearing flower, and even some banana trees. One of the most famous places we visited was the Hemingway House. I probably would have appreciated it more if I knew more about Ernest Hemingway at the time, but it was interesting to learn about his struggles and how he dealt with them. He also apparently kept a family of cats with extra toes. Their descendants are still around today and will apparently chase away any cats that do not have an extra digit. They didn't mind people though, and this may be because we have 5 fingers just like them. After this, we continued exploring the city. We got our obligatory picture at the southernmost point, said hello to the southernmost crab, and then got a picture at the point that was even further south than the supposed southernmost point. We also went to the Basilica of St. Mary, Star of the Sea. It was a fairly simple church, but they did a really good job with the art. Specifically, the Christmas trees in the back seemed to frame the stained glass window extremely well. We also happened to run into the rector of the basilica, who showed us around the grounds outside. A notable part of this was the Lord's Grotto. There is a legend that comes of this that as long as this grotto stands, Key West will be protected. After spending a little more time looking at the statues, we continued wandering around the city, finding even more southernmost points, and later met up with the rest of the group to watch the sunset and head off to dinner. We ended the night at the Conch Republic Seafood Company, where I got a key lime pie as a reward for catching a shark. After finishing our meals, we headed back to camp so we could get some good sleep before leaving for home early the next day. The beauty of the Keys isn't quite the same as the grandiose type that comes with looking at rows of mountains towering over you. Rather, it really shines in the little things that are easily overlooked. Some of this is as simple as flowers you see while walking down the street. It could also be something more complex like the interconnectedness of each environment. Moreover, it is often understanding the complexities of these areas that give one a greater appreciation for them. For example, when I was looking at the mangrove roots, my focus initially was on how the sun illuminated the space. Then your eyes are drawn towards how the roots provided shelter for the fish. It was clear why juvenile fish had stripes, and it was cool to see a fact that we had learned in class in action. While I always enjoyed the ocean and nothing really compares to the reef, this trip gave me a real appreciation for the smaller things and how they connect together. From now on, whenever I visit the ocean, you might find me digging through the sand just to find what little marvels it has to offer.